Hello, everyone. Welcome to ITS 372. Hopefully everyone is joining. Okay, so the video is recording, all right, so today, as you know, today's lab is Wednesday. We have a short week because of the Martin Luther King day break. Okay, so we're just as I said last week, we had a lab where we started with some Linux commands. We're just getting, this is the second week, so we're just getting everyone situated, and hopefully you worked on some of those Linux commands for that assignment. And then today, all that we are doing is we're going to work on the scripts, right? So if you remember, I said that you don't have to do the scripts because those are things that I'm going to cover today. So today I'm just going to provide a brief introduction, or review, rather, sorry, a short review of Python. We're going to go over some of the mechanics of how Python works, and then hopefully with that, you'll be better prepared for, the scripting that we're going to do this semester. Before we get started, are there any questions?
I have one question. Would you like for us to follow along kind of as we go through the scripting today?
It's up. You should. I mean, you should be able to do this on your own. It's up to you. I'll record the video and post it. You can do it later on if you'd like. But the point of today is to do a review of scripting, and then you will, because automation is important to sysadmin, whenever we cover certain types of Linux commands, I will always incorporate, write a script about this or that, okay, where you have to use the Linux commands and you have to use Python as well, okay? Any other questions? Okay, sounds like there's no other questions. Okay, so if you noticed, I already had my VM, my virtual machine started, so I'm going to share and go to that. Currently, you can use any Linux Ubuntu for this assignment. It really doesn't matter. I just happen to have the Seed Labs VM open, so I'll be using that today. As I said, we're just going to create some scripts. So I'm going to go ahead. As you can see, I've already created a folder on my desktop in the VM called ITS 372 Spring 2021. So that's really where I'm going to store my scripts, just so that I can have everything organized. By the way, before I forget, I need to do the course participation. So let me just give me a second. I'm going to take a picture of everyone. All right, so I think I've got everyone in the list. Okay, so I've added I've done the closed participation. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the CVM. We're going to, as I said, just practice, consider this a review, right, to get everyone on the same page of the Python scripting language. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal. Go ahead and open up a terminal. You can see I'm going to click on this, type terminal, pick the terminal, and now I can just navigate. So hopefully you've had a chance last week. Excuse me. You had a chance last week to practice. Once I do these examples, we're going to go back to the handout that I gave you last week, and you're going to see that in there, there's a list of scripts that I was going to provide, and then there's one problem that you need to solve on your own, okay? So I'll read through that once we've done the examples. So for now, let's just navigate into the desktop. I'm going to go to the desktop. And by the way, guys, I keep seeing the Zoom flashing. So I don't know if you're writing comments or something, but I can't see them when I'm like doing what I'm doing right now. So if you have questions, just speak up, okay? Okay, so I'm in the desktop now. I'm going to, I have my folder ITS 372 Spring 2021. That's this semester. So I'm going to do ITS, hit tab, 37, tab, okay? And now I'm in the folder, okay? And if you notice, all we did last week was we started Hello World. We did a very simple script, right? If we want to view it, we can do cat, right? And basically we had a little comment, and then we had a print statement of Hello World. That's really all that we did. Today we're going to go into a little bit more detail about Python, just to kind of introduce this topic a little bit better. So, Python is very, advantages of it. It is very object oriented, and it's got a very large library. Oh, that's what it is, people coming in. Okay, so it's got a very large, so Python has a very large library, which means that there's a lot of, for instance, one of the important libraries that we will see is a library called Dhcp for networking, network security. But there are many libraries that we can use for many applications. And so that's one of the advantages of using something like that. It's very easy to understand syntax, very straightforward. The learning curve is also very short, so you don't really spend a lot of time. This keeps flashing, right? Okay. So it doesn't have a bad learning curve, and it's so it's very it's very simple, really. The only thing that is sometimes a little bit difficult to get used to is that whereas other programming languages use curly brackets to kind of group blocks of code, in Python, code is blocked based on indentation. But we will see examples of how that works. All right, so we've done the example on Hello World, which is usually the first one. Now let's just do a simple example just to kind of illustrate, some elements of Python. Here I'm going to do an if statement, right? So remember, I'm just using Nano, but you can use gedit or VI, whatever you prefer. I'm going to call this script, I'm going to call it simple if.py. Okay, for this one, I'm going to import a library called sys. Whenever I import this library, this basically allows me to have access to the system. So there's a couple of libraries that are really important that are useful. Another one is OS, and as you might imagine, it stands for the operating system. So these two modules, sys and OS, allow me to interact with my Linux machine. And that's really great because it allows me to gather data from the machine that I can use for monitoring, for controlling things in the operating system for various tasks. So in this case, I'm going to use the sys module to access information from the standard in and standard out redirection on the terminal. Okay, so we'll see how that works a little later in the semester. But for now, we're going to use sys for that, for standard in and standard out redirection, so that we can get values from the terminal. All right, so we're going to assume that we have a program, this program, simple if, but we want to give it a parameter on the terminal itself. So for that, to grab that value, we can say something like a, so I create a variable, no need to provide a data type. And then I'm going to say sys.argv1, right? So by doing this, you'll see that I can pass a parameter to the system. So then I can do print a, right? So if I do this, and then usually I like to add a print done at the end. Oops. This just gives me feedback that the program has ended correctly. It's just a preference that I have, but it's sometimes helpful to kind of debug a program. Okay, so let's go ahead. Once I have a script, I'm going to save it. So I'm going to hit Control X, Y, Enter. Right, and then now to run it, I can take the simple if, and I'm going to type Python. Now notice what will happen here. If I just hit Python simple if py, it gets an error, and that's because I didn't pass a parameter to it. That's what it's complaining about, right? So it's saying that on line 4, where it found this, there was nothing in value 1. So that array from the standard in, from the terminal values, does not have anything currently. So for this to work, I have to run it again, but this time I have to provide a parameter. So I'm going to say space, and I'm just going to provide a value. So let's say 42. All right, so now if I hit enter, there you go. Now it did work. I did get the done. So it goes all the way to completion, and it actually printed back out the value to me. So it printed back out the value 42. Okay. So now that we can go back back to the script, now that we've completed this, so I'm going to do ls. I'm going to open simple again. All right, now I want to do more than just printing the result back out. Instead, I want to apply some logic. All right, so we're going to imagine that now we provide an if statement. So this will be an example of how to use an if statement. So I'm going to say if a equal to 1, right? So if I pass that parameter 1, notice that whenever I do an if statement and I end it, I am going to use a colon. So that's something that's part of the syntax, right? Whenever you're starting a block of code that's indented within something like with an if statement, you use the colon, and then instead of curly brackets, which you would have used here, you know, to add the code in other languages, we're going to add indentation. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I add the code. So I'm going to say print A is 1. All right, and that's what you get as the output. Now, if it's not a 1, if I don't pass a 1, I want to handle that. So usually you can have the else statement. So now I can say else, which means it's not 1. So I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, print, and I can print out a different message. So I can say A is, and then you can just print out the value itself. So I can do print A. All right, so this is just a very simple example of us using an if statement to accomplish our task. So now if we run this code, Control X, Y, right? I'm going to repeat the command Python simple underscore if.py. I don't want to use the 42. I'm just going to type 1. So if it's 1, it should print out the word 1. And there you go. It works. If it's not a 1, let's say it's going to be 17. Now I hit, and it prints out the actual 17. Make sense, guys? Any questions?
I don't think so.
Right, so pretty simple. Again, this is just, review or getting everyone on the same page. But now the code that we're going to be writing for scripting is always going to be pretty simple. It's not like, we have to worry about advanced data structures or anything very complex. It's just going to be, scripts for sysadmin are just pretty simple. Okay, so they're just pretty simple things. So they don't really involve anything complicated. But, I'm giving you all these elements, all these pieces, and then later we're going to talk about the programs that I want you to implement. So the next thing we're going to do is, let's say that you want to open a file, right? So one of the things we're going to learn next week, upcoming Monday, is the Unix way. We're going to start our discussion of the Unix way, and we're going to take a look at how everything is a file in Linux, right? And so being able to manipulate files, log files or any kind of file, configuration files will always, or storage files will always be very useful, right? So in this case, we're going to take I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it file read, let's say. So I'm going to say nano file underscore read.py. Okay. So this script will read a file in the system. So in the system, there's a file called, in the etc folder called passwd. It includes all the information about the users in the operating system, and it's associated with the shadow file, which is the one that contains the encrypted passwords. Okay, but in this case, we're only going to open up the file passwd and etc, and then we're going to print out our results. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable f, and I'm going to open it. So open. All right, so I open etc. So I have to specify the Linux path, passwd, and then I'm going to read it. Okay, so read. All right, so that should open the file. Now, if I want to read through the file, there are various ways that I can do this. One simple way is just to bring up all the contents of the file. So this is going to bring basically all the lines in that file, right? All the rows, all the lines into a list. So to do that, I'm going to create f.readLines. So if I make a call to this method returns a list of all the rows or all the lines in that file. However, because this is a list, I can actually iterate through all the items in that list. And the way to do that is I can type for line in f.readLines. So now I'm going to iterate through all the elements in this that this method returns. Colon. Now I can print the line. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can print line. All right. So once I print the lines, whenever you open a file, you always want to make sure that you also close it. Okay, so I'm going to do f.close as well. And that's it. The last part of this is to add probably the message. As I said, it it helps me to debug. Okay, so now that we have this, we can proceed to run this code. It should print out all the user names. I'm going to do Control X, Y, enter. I'm going to run Python here. And there you go. Now take a minute or two and analyze what's in here. Right? So take a few minutes, try to take a look at what's in there and get a sense for what that file contains. Remember, each row is actually an account in the system. Now, there are accounts for people, like the root and seed, but there's also accounts for applications. Okay, so if you notice there, you'll see that we have the first one is root. The X just means that there's a password and the password is encrypted and it's in the shadow file. If there was, instead of X, if there was a value there, then you could have a password there. Right, then it indicates the ID. So root is ID 0. Okay. And then it, it indicates the folder. So that's more obvious. If you look at daemon, for instance, you can see it's in the folder user bin. And then it's got the shell link. All right, so it's for some of these, there's no login, but for some, there might be. So if we look at, for instance, seed in this machine, the seed account should be here somewhere. There it is. So the seed account has an ID of 1000. The home folder is this one, and then it uses bin bash for its command interpreting. Okay? So that's basically what that does. So I'm going to go back to the code, let you look at it for a sec. So the idea is you can read any file in the system and then print out the lines to it. All right. So that is example number 2. This one incorporates, as you can see, a loop plus reading from a file, which are 2 of the basic mechanisms that might be important. Questions? Nope. All right. Yeah, pretty straightforward. This is the second example. We can look at another example of using a for loop. In this case, we can do a for loop where we just specify a range of values. Okay, and then we're just going to print out the values. So let's go ahead and close this one, clear this. All right, so if we look at ls, we can see all the scripts in the folder. Now we can create a new one. So I'm going to do nano. And then let's just say range loop .py. Okay, so we're going to open this one. So now we can just write the code for a loop in a range. All right, same thing. We do for counter in range. And then we can specify a range, let's say from 1 to 20. And add parentheses, colon. And now we're just going to print out the value of counter. So I can do indentation again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Print counter. And that's it. Oops. And that's
I have
it.
a question.
Go ahead, please.
How come we don't use like imports for this? like
How
import.
come I don't? Oh, because I had an import in the first one, right? That's what you mean?
Yeah.
Because in the first one, I actually used specifically the sys module. So if I go back and I go to ls, and then we look at file, no, simple if, right? So if I do cat simple if, you can see that the reason why this one had imports is that I actually needed an import. Or the
Yeah, I understand. That makes
OS
sense.
gave me access to specific things. So basically the OS there was not needed. So in Python, you only import a library if you're going to use it.
Right. Yeah, because I know some languages you always have to import. Not just,
Right. No, I see where you're going with this, that you should have some like default libraries in there.
right.
No, that's not in this case. That's a good question. I shouldn't have added the OS. I was just explaining that you can add more libraries, but the sys is actually something that I did end up using here. That's the difference. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, right. So in the other ones, now if we go back to the scripts, range loop, for instance, here I'm not really using, I don't need a library because all the things here, you know, this is just default code, so it exists in Python itself without it needing a library. So now let's go ahead and run this one. This should basically just print out numbers from 1 to 20, right? So if I hit Control X, right, save. So now I'm gonna hit Python here. And you can see it printed out all the numbers from 0, from 1 to 19, basically. Okay. It didn't include the 20 because it goes to that number without printing it, actually. Okay. Okay. Let's do one that's a little bit more complicated. All right, so let's do, now we're going to use the OS, and this one is called directory listing. The point of it is to kind of view the contents of a directory. So I'm going to do, all right, so if you notice, first of all, I have 4 files, right? So I have 4 files. So I'm going to create a basic mechanism to kind of iterate through the contents of a folder. Okay, so I'm going to create a script. It might even include itself, right? So I'm going to do, call this directory listing. .py. Okay, so for this one, I will use the import OS. All right, remember, this is the command, the library that I can use to interact with the operating system. So the first thing I'm going to specify is a path. All right, so I'm going to specify a path. What path? Probably the path to where my scripts are located. So how do I know that path? Well, I can save this. I can do pwd, and then now I have the full path, right? From the root folder, which is this one, to home, C desktop, and the folder name. So I'm just going to copy this, copy that. I'm going to open this again, and now in path, there we go. So I have the path, and now I want to be able to find ways of iterating through all the elements. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to get a list of all the files in that folder. All right, so there's a function for that, os.list directory. So list dir. What do I specify to this? I specify the word path, so I know that I need to look into that path and list the contents of it. However, what I really want to do is I want to maybe read the contents of the file, or maybe iterate through the files in some way. So given that this returns a list of all the file names, then I can easily then just iterate through this list. So I can say for file name in OS list dir path. And now whenever I do an if statement or a for loop, remember I'm going to use colon at the end, and that implies that the block of code contained within the for or the if should be indented. I'm going to hit enter. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just you can use also 2, but just be consistent with your convention. So either 2 or I use 4 for everything. That way there's no confusion basically. Okay, so so we have the for loop, and now what we want to do is we want to play with this so that we can read all the files. So this gives us the list of files. So what we probably want to do is just print all these file names. So I'm just going to do that. Print file name. Sorry. Print the file name. All right, so let's go ahead and run this example. So I'm going to Control X. If everything is correct, we should be able to see the files. Oops. So I need to switch to Python instead of Nano. All right, so now let's run it. And there you go. Do you guys think it worked?
Yeah.
It did, right? Because those are, if I do ls, you see it's the same names. Hello world.py, file read.py, directory listing.py. All of them are there. Okay. Now, here's the next part. I don't just want to read the file names, but I actually want to check that the file exists, and then I want to read the contents of each file and print it out to the screen. So what do you guys think? How can you help me to solve that? Any ideas?
Print statement.
Print statement, sure, but there's a little bit more than that.
Couldn't you also just use the file read.py that we made earlier, essentially?
The function file read, okay. Sure. Yes. But there's a little bit, we have the names of the files, right? And so we want to read them. Now, in this case, we are in this folder. However, let's say that you want to check. You want to check, first of all, that the file exists. You want actually to be the full path, like when I do pwd, right? Oops. So if I do pwd, I want the whole path and / and the name of the file in each entry. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take that a step further. All right, so let's go back to the code. All right, and I'm gonna say, you know what? I don't want to just print, so I'm going to comment this out. And instead, 1, 2, 3, 4, notice the indentation there, 4 spaces. I want to create what is called path name. This will combine the path and the file. So then I'm going to use OS again, OS dot path dot join. And that join will allow me to combine for each one the path with the corresponding file name. Right, so now I'm going to have each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, indentation again. And now I want to check if the files exist, actually. So I'm going to say if os dot, for whatever reason, I just want to make sure they are valid paths. I'm going to say os.path.isFile. All right, and the isFile basically will check the path, so and it'll return true if it does exist, and there's a file there. So if os path.isFile path name. So now only for files that exist, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to print out again file name. All right, or actually, to make it more interesting, let's print out path name so that we can see. All right, so with this now, we're still not going to see the contents of the file, but we can see the, at least now the combined path and name together. Let's go ahead and do that. Control X, fine. All right, clear here. And as you can see, now it printed out all the file names, but it appended to them, or it added to them in front the path. The last part is, like somebody said, how about just reading with a, f.read or something like that. Now, the key issue is that each file has multiple lines of code, right? So each line has, or each file has multiple lines of code, and we want to actually view all the lines of code per file. So to do that, we can go over here. Again, we can just comment this out. Make sure you indent properly. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now within the if statement, another indent, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so everything is aligned. Now I can open the file. So I'm going to say if open path name, if open path name, comma, read. So this flag just basically tells when you open a file, you're only open it to read the contents, not to write, for instance, or a pen. All right. And now I've opened the file. So this opens the file. So now make sure this is indented. And now I can grab all the lines like I did before, exactly like I did before. So I'm just going to use f.read lines. F.read lines, remember, for that particular file, the current one of the 5 that I'm opening in this iteration, I'm going to get all the lines in it. So when I have all the lines and it returns a list, then I can iterate through them. So then I'm going to say for line in f.read lines. So again, when there's a for, a function, or an if statement, you need to add a colon here. That is followed by indentation. So you can basically go below 4 and then now 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, that's the alignment. And now all that's left really is we want to print. So I'm going to do print line. So now I should be able to see the lines. The last thing I always want to do is whenever I open a file, you need to close it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is aligned with that for loop up here. And so now I need to do f dot close. If I open a file, I should close it. All right. If this was implemented correctly, we should now be able to view the contents of each file. So let's go ahead on your end, if you're following along, try it out. All right, so hopefully you tried it out and it worked for you. Somebody's asking me. Yes, exactly. So this program is, it's directory listing and printing the contents of a file. So this will print each file's path, file name, followed by every line of code inside of it. That is correct. And actually, we're going to take it one step further in a second. But this is a very handy code whenever you want to, let's say you want to, what is called parsing, right? So whenever you want to parse a file. So as I will say next week on Tuesday, or sorry, Monday, when we talk about Unix, we'll talk about the Unix way where everything is a file. Logs are files, configurations are based on files. And so we need to, being able to parse a file is useful. All right, so now let me switch over back to our VM. So I'm gonna go ahead now and just save this. Control X, Y. All right, now I'm gonna run it. And it worked. So it's very similar to cat in a sense, except obviously that here I was able to print every single file. If you look, there's the first one, the args is args, right? Then here's the second one, the counter, right? There's the hello world. There is the printing out the contents of the etc password file. And then now this one, a little bit more complex, is the directory listing. Okay. All right. So the next step is basically we are printing one entire line at a time, right? So we have each line at a time in there. However, in a log, let's say that, one of the problems that I might give you in the future is I give you a log and I'll ask you to calculate some statistics about that log. So the logs will be separated by spaces. Let's say it'll be like user space, timestamp space, program use space, and so on, right? So they're going to be kind of aligned and separated by spaces. So sometimes it's useful to actually, you want to be able to split, right? So you want to be able to split a sentence into individual words so that you can store them in like a list. Right, so that's what we're going to do. Next is I'm going to open the file here, right? And now where I would print the line, now I can print the line, but also I want to split the line. So I'm going to create my list, it's a simple list. All right, so it's a simple, my list here. And my list basically you take line, which is the sentence, if you will, or the statement, and you're going to do dot split. And there are various ways of splitting things. So you can split things by default, by comma, you know, by whatever character. So in this case, let's say just a space in there, right? This will split then each line, hopefully. And then all we have to do is print my list so that we can see that the elements are now broken up into elements. So I'm going to do another print, this time of my list, like that. I have a typo there. Remember, Python is case sensitive, so watch out for that. All right, once I have this, let's try it again. So I'm going to do Control X, Y. All right. I'll do it clear. And now we can run it. And there you go. What do you guys notice?
It seems
Josh accept everything.
Everything's in the quotes.
Right, and it's got all these. It did some things. So the parsing is not great, right? The parsing is not great with this approach. Here, for instance, it's got this, and it's got that, and it's got that for that line. But then it's got all these like blank spaces, right? So it's almost like it took a space, and then or three spaces, and it took one space to split, but then it created a list of additional spaces. So maybe we can try another symbol. Somebody wrote something. Yeah, each individual space is being considered a word, exactly. So what we probably want to do is, just for now, split on something else, right? So
What would we use this for?
if you had a log file, so for instance, let me do this. Let's go to log files, right? So let's go to log. There are many applications, but logs come to mind. Do you see there the log folder? So we can go in there. And then now we have all these logs, right? So let's say, I don't know which one of these will have values. Probably. Probably. Let's try syslog. Okay. Do you see that there's information in here, and the information actually happens to have a repeating pattern? Do you see it? So for instance, these two,
Yep.
right? This one has a date, Jan 20. Then it's followed by time. Then it's followed by, you know, the process, right? The card, this is the network card. So in this case, this one might be a better example because here, the spaces, it would split on these in a way that it would give you this whole thing, right? It's like it would use the spaces to do the split. And then you would get all these individual elements that you can then use for analysis of your log files. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does. That makes sense.
Yeah. So later on, as I said, a lot of these scripts that we're doing right now are just really to practice the base, you know, how we're going to do the coding. But later on, you'll see once we do problems that, you know, I might say do a directory listing and find for user 36, you know, what applications they use on January 20th. And so that's a quick way so that you don't manually have to look for this information.
Professor Calix, could you go back to the code for directory listing real quick? I'm missing just one statement.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I need to go back then to my folder where I was. So I'm in home. Feed. And then desktop. And 2021. Okay, so I was working through directory listing. So I'm going to do directory tab. Okay, and there we are. So hopefully that made sense. As I said, you can play with these. This example was probably not great since it's just based on all the scripts that I'm using. But if you had a var log, or if you have comma separated files, you know, or tab separated files, you know, that might be a little bit easier to do the splits on. So it just depends on how you create the log file that then you can use something like this. Okay, guys? But hopefully this completes the pipeline. Any questions?
I actually have one. So I was just wondering if there's a big difference between using a tab versus the 4 spaces. Because
That's a very good question. Very good.
I've actually been using the tab this whole time. So when I ran the file with the space, it actually it doesn't have those spaces that you were talking about.
Right. Yours came out better, is what you're telling me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That makes sense. You actually, as far as programming, as far as just coding, it doesn't matter if you use tabs or 2 spaces or 4 spaces, as long as you're consistent. Well, my only recommendation is don't mix them, okay? Don't sometimes use tabs, sometimes use spaces, because then you'll get confused, and that may lead to errors in your coding. So I usually use 4 spaces, but I'll tell you, there are programmers that do not use spaces and only use tabs. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
So it's really up to you. It's a style choice. And you showed that actually it gave you an advantage with what we were doing. So yeah, good question. Good question. All right. Any other questions? Pretty straightforward, really. This was just a review of some of the scripting things that we can do or we will do later in the semester. As you can see, it's nothing complicated. It's more about interacting with the operating system in an automated way. So I think these are the I've done all the examples. So directory listing, it's done. Okay. So now I think let's go back to the handout and let's see if I completed everything. Because you guys do have a problem that you need to solve, right? You have a problem. Let me just double check.
Can you go over exactly what we're supposed to do for question 18 and 19?
Yes, I'm going to go back to the document now.
Okay, thank you.
So as I said, these examples were just meant to be a review, right? Of very basic things. And then you just have one problem that I'm going to ask you to work on for the homework. So let's go. So yeah, so this one's complete. So yes and save. Okay. Now let's do let's go to Brightspace. And now we're ready. You should be seeing Brightspace. Now we're ready to go back to the handout and complete that homework assignment. All right, so I wrote, oh, let's do this. Okay, so we were in, yeah, we haven't gotten to this yet. Let me take a look at that. All right, this is the problem that the problems that I'm going to give you. So let's go to the handout first. Okay, intro. So the handout said, from the attached Word document, complete problems 1 through 26, submit a report with screenshots for each problem and answer the following questions. So that's what's due tonight, correct? That's due tonight.
Yeah.
Then
Right.
I'm going to now look at this one. All right, so that's 1 through 26 is in here. You should be seeing. All right, so 1 through 26. Okay. SysArg's script. Okay, so the person that just asked me, you understand 1 through 26, that's what's due tonight. Then we have these. SysArg's script with Python, we just did that, right? That's an example I provided. View contents of password file script, I just did that as well, right? You saw that. Directory listing script, I just did that, right? And then there's the system information gathering script, okay? So that one I haven't done, and that's what's gonna be the problem that you guys have to solve, okay? So let me, for now, all I want you to do is the 4 problems, or 1, 2, 3 problems that I did in class today, as practice problems. I want to make sure you practice them, that you didn't just watch the video and you kind of just sat there. You should, if you haven't done so already, run these in your own. So I'm going to create a new link for these, okay? So it's going to say 27 and through 29.
You just want us to screenshot our codes and pictures of it executing?
Shot of you running it. I just want to make sure you don't just watch the video, that you actually do them.
Right on, I understand.
Just for, I want to make sure you practice. It seems trivial, but I think it's valid that you do it. So let me add a new link for this one. This will be due obviously a week from today, not tonight. So let me do new assignment. And then complete 27 through 29, right? From the attached handout as shown in class. Okay, this is homework intro. Scripting examples. So it's easy points, guys. Easy points. This will be due, today is the 20th, so it'll be due on the 27th by 10 p.m. And then start date today. 27, couple of days, Saturday. All right. So that, are there any questions on that?
I have a question about the lab report.
Yes, what's your question?
So if there's no specific question, for example, number 3 just says open a terminal, is the screenshot just okay, or do we have
The
to?
screenshot is okay, yes, exactly.
Okay,
No question. Remember, these are just, I just want you to practice Linux. That's literally, you know, a lot of the class is just that. Practice commands, figure out what they do, get a feel for it. Make sense?
So we don't have to give like an extra explanation for some stuff, like if it's just,
No. If there's no question, no.
okay, thank you.
Any other question? All right, so I added now this, right? So now this should be clear that I just want you to practice 27 through 29. And that's it as far as the intro homework. Obviously, when we start, this was the easiest homework. It's kind of more relaxed. Other homeworks will be a little bit more specific.
You said just showing the execution is fine for those. We don't actually have to screenshot the scripts.
Sorry, I was reading the chat. You don't have, if you want, you can put in the script, but really the thing that I'm looking for is that it works, right? That it runs.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
All right. So that completes the intro document, okay, guys? So that's basically it. Now, as far as the problem that I want you to write on your own, let's go back to here. So now that I've given you the scripting and now that you have the Linux commands and you have some examples of scripting, you have to go here, right? And I've posted a separate homework, which is called scripting in case, okay? So what I want you to do here is, first of all, I've added this document. You can take a look at it. This is just a document for you to read. It's got a lot of information about Python. Okay, so I strongly recommend that you take a look at it. You know, you don't have to memorize it, or I'm not asking you to memorize it. It's not homework. This is just a handout for you to read. You can also always just check the course that I mentioned, 140. I have the videos posted there, or just online, you know, you can find lots of materials. But this would be a good reference, I think. So certainly taking a read through it might be useful. Okay. And then let's see, you're still writing on the chat, so what do you say? Okay, so I will go through 18 and 19 in a second, but let me just finish what I'm trying to say now, okay, and remind me. All right, so now, if we go back to the scripting in case, this is also due a week from today. And basically here is the homework. So if you click on this file, here is the problem. Problem 1. Write a Python script to gather 10 pieces of information from the operating system, such as uptime, which you know how to get, name, disk partition space, use, etc. You can use the following, which is the subprocess.call function or OS to interact, to have your Python script interact with the operating system, okay? But basically this is, I'm only giving you one problem, which is that gather 10 pieces of information from the operating system, such as uptime, etc. You have to obviously gather them automatically through the script and then display them in a kind of a report. Okay, so this also, I'm going to create the assignment link for it. Let me go here. New assignment. So this is homework information. Information gathering script. Okay, so that's going to be That is also due on the 27th, 10 p.m. And then this is just going to be complete the attached problem, which is problem 1. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right, so that one, so what do I mean by that? I'm just going to give you a simple hint, a simple example, but remember, I need to see 10 pieces of information that you've gathered about the operating system. Remember, sysadmin is about configuring, monitoring, getting information, right? So right now you're trying to automate things. So let's go back to the virtual machine then, and just do a very simple example of how that would work. All right, so I'm going to create another script here. I'm going to call it interact with OS.
We're still seeing your.
Oh. There, you can see it now.
Yeah.
So I'm creating a folder, interact with os.py, right? So this is another, now you can use what you learned about your logic of scripting plus what you learn about the Linux commands, and through this mechanism that I'll show you in a second, you can combine both of those things to automate more fully. Remember that our goal is to just keep automating and automating. In a couple of weeks, probably we'll look at cron jobs, which is a task scheduling mechanism, and that will add even a more complex layer to this. But for now, what we can do this simply by importing a module called subprocess. Right, subprocess will allow us to interact with our operating system. You can also import OS. Now, I won't obviously solve the problem. I will just provide one example. So let's say, what's one command that you should be familiar with now? It's this command, right? You type ls-l. What happens when you type ls-l in the command line? You get a directory listing of your information. But now you want to, through automation, you want to run this from Python, right? Your script. So then what we do is we need to call subprocess. We call the module, and then from it we have a method called call, right? Call. And then call takes basically a list of commands. So I can say, for instance, commands list. Oops. Commands list. And then in here, I'm going to say something. I'm going to specify, the commands that I want. So you do basically the command and then the flag. So comma -l, like that, right? So now all I have to do is I have to add, if everything works, commands _list in here. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this. So Control X, Y. All right. And now I'm going to go in here, Python, and I run it. And there you go. Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I saw it.
So I ran the script. The script called the terminal, ran the command, and basically through this mechanism, now you can completely automate any command in Linux, right? So we will be doing a lot of this. So certainly save that command for future reference. Okay. All right. So
Is this for that question? I think it's 30 on that?
It was
Document?
30, but I've created a separate, if we go back to the,
Okay, so this is part 2 of the lab then.
yes, it's tech, if we go back here, right? So I showed you, we go back here. So that last question I said, this last question, 30, right, that you mentioned, since this information gathering, I simply just moved it to be its own lab. So you can see here, it's basically here, right? It's the same question. Write a Python script to gather 10 pieces of information from the operating system, such as uptime, name, disk partition, space used, and you can use, what I just described.
All right, yeah, that works. Thank you.
That way you guys get, more credit just for this. All right, good. So that's everything from me. I've described now the entire lab, right? That entire document is comprised of 3 links that you need to submit. I usually will do that a lot. I don't like to have way too many topics in a lab report, so I like to break it up into more manageable units. And so you have 3 submissions there, basically. Each one is a lab. Next week, we will cover services. So we'll start here the Unix way, as I said, on Monday. And then we'll keep going with additional material here. We'll have more scripting examples. You'll have your first Wireshark reading assignment as well. And just, the regular lab. Then after that, grab an awk, task scheduling, and all that. All right, so now that's basically all the new content that I had. Then because today's a lab, the rest of the time, just please use it. If you have any questions about anything, I'll help you. So the floor is yours. So I think someone had a question about a couple of problems.
Yes, number 18 and 19 in the intro lab.
You have a specific question? Let's see. 18 and 19. Basically, this is just exploration. They're exploration labs. So in this one, all I want you to do is really go to the GUI interface. So it says here DHCP edit connections, right? So what is DHCP is that. It dynamically allocates IP addresses to clients. So I basically wanted you to find this in the system. I can help you.
Okay. No, I wanted to explain like what you wanted from us. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically it. So what you do is you go here. I'm gonna share the VM. All right. Not everything that you will need on the VM is command line, right? Sometimes it is helpful to use the GUI interface, for instance. So if you click on this, usually, it's gonna vary by version, 20 version, 18 version, but usually you find these like the network connection icon, right? You click on it, and then when you click on edit connections, it opens, a GUI. Then you can click on, one of the interfaces. I'm using this one. You go to edit. And then what's important here is IPv4 settings, right? So you go to IPv4, and then you can see there it is. The method of receiving an IP address. So currently it is set to DHCP. However, there might be some labs where you have to set this manually. And then what would you have to do? I'm not going to change it, but you would click on this, and then you can see set manual. Do you see that?
Yep. I got it on my own screen as well. Thank you.
Yeah. And so once you have manual, this will become enabled, right? This like an entry here. You can do add. At least the button will become enabled, and then you enter, the IP address, the net mask, the gateway, and all of this. It's important to set your computer. You can add DNS servers. You can also add routes and so on. That's really what I wanted to show you there. Okay?
Got it now.
All right. Any other questions, guys?
I don't think I have any, at least.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. So that, you know, that's basically the lab. That's the new content for this week. Work on these assignments. You know, start working on the information gathering if you already completed the rest. And then otherwise, just ask questions. I'll be here. I'll at this point, stop the recording.